Walter Edward Weaver.
Nathaniel Webb.
Dinah Webster.
William Michael Weems.
Joanne Flora Weil.
Michael Thomas Weinberg.
Stephen Weinberg.
Scott Jeffrey Weingart.
Stephen George Weinstein.
Simon Weiser.
David M. Weiss.
David Thomas Weiss.
Chin Sun Pak Wells.
Vincent Michael Wells.
Deborah Jacobs Welsh.
Timothy Matthew Welty.
Christian Hans Rudolph Wemmers.
Su Hui Wen.
John Joseph Wankus.
Ola D. Wangenchuk.
Peter M. West.
Whitfield West Jr.
Meredith Lynn Whalen.
Eugene Michael Whalen.
Adam S. White.
Edward James White III.
James Patrick White.
And my father, Wei Bing Wong.
Are you okay? And my uncle, William Valcarcel. I didn't get to know him very well, but I know his children and I know his grandchildren, and I'm very grateful to know them every single day because I know that he would be proud of them because I'm proud of them every single day. I miss you.
We love you and miss you so very much. You will live on in our hearts forever. And may love and peace always prevail.
John Sylvester White.
Kenneth Wilburn White, Jr.
Leonard Anthony White.
Melissa Y. White.
Maudlin A. White.
Sandra L. White.
Wayne White.
Leanne Marie Whiteside.
Mark P. Whitford.
Leslie A. Whittington.
Michael T. Holy.
Mary Lenz Wyman.
Jeffrey David Wiener.
William J. Wick.
Allison Marie Wildman.
Glenn E. Wilkinson.
Ernest M. Wilcher.
John Charles Willett.
Brian Patrick Williams.
Candace Lee Williams.
Crossley Richard Williams, Jr.
David J. Williams.
David Lucian Williams.
Debbie L. Williams.
Dwayne Williams.
Kevin Michael Williams.
Louis Anthony Williams.
Louis Calvin Williams III.
John P. Williamson.
Donna Ann Wilson.
William Eben Wilson.
David Harold Winton.
Glenn J. Winnick.
Thomas Francis Wise.
Alan L. Wisniewski.
Frank Paul Wisniewski.
David Wiswall.
Sigrid Charlotte Wiswe.
Michael R. Wittenstein.
Christopher W. Wodneschek.
Martin Phillips Woolforth.
Catherine Susan Wolf.
Jennifer Yen Wong.
Suchong Steve Wong.
Yin Ping Wong.
Yuk Ping Wong.
Brent James Woodall.
James John Woods.
Marvin Roger Woods.
Patrick J. Woods,
Richard Heron Woodwell,
David Terrence Woolley,
John Bentley Works,
Martin Michael Wortley,
Rodney James Watton,
William Wren, retired,
John W. Wright Jr.,
Neil Robin White,
Sandra Lee Wright,
Jupiter Yambem,
and my father, Jorge Velasquez. We remember his dedication, sacrifices, love, laughter, support, the wisdom and humility, and his hard work. He wasn't just a 9/11 victim and hero. He was a father, husband, brother, and friend, and he will never be forgotten. We love him.
and my father, Norbert P. Shurkovsky, who I never met because my mom was only pregnant with me. Thank you for my life, my name, and everything in between. Thank you for Alex and my mom. I miss you every day and love you so much more. Mommy, Alex, and I miss you more and love you. I will meet you one day, but today I will live your legacy on.
John D. Yamnicki Sr.,
Suresh Yanamadala,
Vicky Yancey,
Shu Yin Yang,
Matthew David Yarnell,
Myrna Yashkula,
Shakila Yasmin,
Ola Bessie Shadi Layeni Yi,
Kevin W. Yoakum,
Edward P. York,
Kevin Patrick York,
Raymond R. York,
Suzanne Martha Yeomans,
Barrington Leroy Young Jr.,
Donald MacArthur Young,
Edmund G. Young Jr.,
Jacqueline Young,
Lisa L. Young,
Elkin Ewan,
Joseph C. Zaccoli,
Adele Agabi Zakari,
Arcady Salzman,
Edwin J. Zambrana Jr.,
Robert Allen Zampieri,
Mark Zangrilli,
Christopher R. Zarba Jr.,
Ira Zaslow,
Kenneth Albert Zellman,
Abraham J. Zelmanovitz,
Martin Morales Zempoaltecatel,
Jay Zhang,
Mark Scott Zeppelin,
Jay Yao Justin Shou,
Yuguan Zheng,
Evelyn Zeminski,
Michael Joseph Zinzi,
Charles Allen Zion,
Julie Lynn Zipper,
Salvatore J. Zizza,
Procopius Paul Zois,
Joseph J. Zukala,
Andrew Stephen Zucker,
Igor Zuckelman,
and my cousins Roshan Ramesh Singh and Kamlade Kami Singh, who are both brothers and sisters, and my uncle Amarnath Lachman. It's been 20 years, but there's not a day that goes by that we do not think of you. We miss your smiles, your laughter, your hugs, and the joy that you brought to our families. We love you and until we meet again. Thank you.
And my brother Nicholas, losing him has left a hole that nothing can replace. And thank you to the people of New York for giving the families this beautiful space where we can honor and remember our loved ones.
Michael Edward Asher, Scott Walter Cahill. Michael Scott Carlo. Terrell Coleman. Michael L. Collins. Linda M. Colin. Stephen Glick. Peter Gerard Galinas. Teresa M. Martin. Daniel R. Nolan. Norman S. Rosenow. And my brother, my little brother, Stephen Gerard Hoffman. You loved and lived in a big way. May we never forget.
This is Molly, and she claims that her son Cade was a victim of 9/11. When he was 3 years old, he started talking about how he remembers dying. During the middle of the night, he'd come into his parents' room and wake them up, and he would come in just screaming, hysterical about how he fell off of a building, and that is how he died. As they started to question him more, he claimed that he worked in the buildings and could see the Statue of Liberty from his office window. He remembers it perfectly. He would also describe being under the building. He claimed that he was in a building and he was hit by something. Then the building exploded and fell to the ground. And what's really interesting is he said that he could see himself dying and falling down from above. What's so interesting about that is it's basically an idea, a study that actual scientists are working on. They think it's possible that you may see your own death from an external point of view.
And he described to us in great detail seeing himself from above and him hitting the ground.
So his parents asked him to draw a picture, which is what a lot of parents in these cases do. When Cade was asked to draw a picture of his dreams, he drew 2 towers, and then he drew a plane going into it and a man falling to the ground. Now, what was also really weird about this is for a very long time, Cade was afraid of being in tall buildings or of planes in general. He was scared of seeing planes in the sky. He was always worried about where they were going to. And Molly, his mom, had a really hard time believing that this was true. But then things started to get really bad. His nightmares were horrendous. It started really taking a bad turn in his life. And so his mom was like, I need to figure this out. They said there's no way that he would have been able to know about 9/11 because they don't know anyone that was there. They had never showed him old news clips. I mean, what parents would be like, check out this old news clip of this event that happened before you were born? Cade had never even been to New York, so the whole thing was just so odd. What was also strange about Cade's case is that he started insisting that his name is not Cade. He completely rejected his own name. Molly has decided to wrote up this story about what had happened to her son and what's going on and asked people for their opinions and help. And then another mother actually sent her a link to a man's story that was very similar to what Cade was describing. Same life. I mean, Cade had described this person's life, and we don't know any of the details because they've decided to keep that part of this secret. But Molly believes that she knows who he is, and she never contacted their family because they're like, okay, we're gonna seem crazy. They're gonna hang up on us if we tell them like, hey, we think our son is the reincarnated version of your loved one, you know? So they've kept that completely secret. And you know, at the end of the day, you can say that Cade's lying. Maybe he does have a really good imagination, or something else can explain how he knows this information. But you know, a lot of people obviously think the parents are making it up. Why would these parents make it up? You're not gonna make money off of this. When he was only 3 years old, he started telling his parents that he was a firefighter in 9/11 and died that day and can remember his whole death. His parents said they never showed him anything to do with 9/11. When asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, he said, I don't just want to be a firefighter. I have always been, and I already am a firefighter. I used to get up in the morning, go to work, and in the evenings I would come home and take off my fire proximity suit. That is quite a lot for a small child to have said. But first, his mother Rachel thought that these statements were just him using his imagination and playing pretend. However, the fact that he continued to talk about these details for weeks and months made her question that maybe he really was recalling memories of 9/11. Thomas talked about specifically having to use an axe to get behind the burning walls of the building to check for fire. So his parents decided to show him a picture of the World Trade Center before it had been attacked. And he looked at it and said, the bad men burnt these buildings. People had to jump and I couldn't help. There were people waiting for firefighters, waiting for me, but I could not get there to help them. He claimed that in Manhattan that day they were using a Fort Johnson R8. The average person would not know that. I had no idea. I wouldn't even known that there were models of fire trucks, to be honest. They confirmed that this was a fire truck that was being used on 9/11. So do we know if this is true? Obviously we don't know if it's true. I do not have all the answers, but I think there's so many interesting details of this. Cannot completely rule it out. Like, something's going on here. Something is weird. That's it for me today, guys. I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you next time. Bye. who shot you down? And he would look at them like they were idiots and say, the Japanese. And keep in mind, this kid is 2. So today we are talking about a boy, and his name is James Leininger. He was born on April 10th of 1998 to Bruce and Andrea Leininger. So when James was young, this is around the year of 2000, he was always obsessed with airplanes, more than just your average kid. This isn't too abnormal, but he really liked planes a lot. Andrea said that one time they were looking at a picture of a plane.
Look, there's a bomb on the bottom of it. He said, that's not a bomb, Mama, that's a drop tank.
What? So how does a 2-year-old know what a drop tank is? And it was like little things like this all the time. They were going to be moving from Texas to Louisiana. And before they left Texas, Bruce wanted to take him to the Kavanaugh Flight Museum in Addison, Texas. Bruce said that he could not believe how mesmerized his son was at this museum. James wanted to spend hours at the World War II exhibit. After being at the exhibit for 3 hours, he tried to take him away from the exhibit and he threw a huge fit. And to get him to stop crying, Bruce actually bought him a videotape, and it was a Navy Blue Angels flight demonstration tape. And they said that when he took it home, it was constantly on. He wanted to watch it all of the time.
And many people have asked us, do we have an aviation or military background? And we don't.
A little more than 2 weeks after his 2nd birthday, towards the end of April of 2000, James started having these crazy nightmares. I know it's very normal for kids to have nightmares. This kid was experiencing nightmares like on a whole nother level. He would act like he was traumatized after being in one of the nightmares. He'd have full-on night terrors where he wouldn't realize he was dreaming and screaming and kicking in his sleep. And his parents became really concerned because this started happening 4 to 6 nights a week. The same nightmare kept happening over and over again of him being on a plane and it crashing and him burning in a plane. The first one to actually like throw out the idea of reincarnation was Andrea's mom. So this is James's grandma. His grandma said maybe James is experiencing a past life memory. Children oftentimes experience past life dreams and everything when they're young because they're closest to the other side. You know, they were just born. It's possible that all of us had memories of our past lives, but no one ever figured it out, or we didn't say anything, or you know, we didn't know that they were past life memories. They suggested that maybe he was struggling with a past life memory, that they needed to help him get past it. And she took her mom's advice and decided to start asking him about the dreams that he was having. And his father was really, really skeptical about this. So Andrea decided to start taking him seriously when he had those dreams. It's almost like he really did just teleport from somewhere. Ask him what happened in the dream, you know, acknowledging them. And James told him that in his dream, he was in a plane and the plane took off from a boat, but then was shot down and crashed. They would ask him, who shot you down? And he would look at them like they were idiots and say, the Japanese. And keep in mind, this kid is 2. I mean, how does he know about World War II? His parents were like baffled that he knew this. And it gets way crazier than that. So they asked him who piloted the plane, who was the pilot, and he said James. They thought he was just confused and he was just saying his own name. I'm the pilot because I was the one dreaming, so James. When they asked him what plane he flew, he would say a Corsair. So they looked it up and it was a real plane. He would talk about how the Corsair had issues with landing, that he would sometimes veer to the left, and that the tires went flat easily. Now that's like a very specific thing for a 2-year-old to say. So then they asked him, what was the name of the boat that your plane flew off of before you got shot down?
Natoma.
Just coming out of nowhere. This is your child. You're with them all the time. You know what they're watching. You know what they're doing. And then he randomly says Natoma. Now what's really crazy is he was right. There really was a boat called the USS Natoma. It was an aircraft carrier, so planes were flying off of it, and it was in the Pacific Ocean during World War II. His dad figured that might just be a coincidence, maybe he just got that one, but this gets even crazier. So James also used to make a lot of drawings, like little drawings of planes, and whenever he drew anything that was related to piloting planes or World War II or something, he always signed them and wrote James 3. Now, no one knew why he started doing that. So as time went on, Bruce pretty much made it his life's work to prove this wrong, to prove that his son wasn't reincarnated, and to find a logical explanation for what strange occurrences were happening. When James was playing with like G.I. Joes and stuff, or his toys, he would sometimes take the propeller off of the front of a plane. He also gave his G.I. Joe characters pretty unusual names. He named them Leon, Billy, and Walter, and his parents had no idea where he got these names from. Bruce asked him, hey, why are those dolls named that? And he said, well, those were the guys that met me in heaven when I first got there. Oh my God. I just can't imagine what you'd do it as a parent. Like, I would be freaking out. His father, of course, was still skeptical. He happened to be in a book club, a history book club, and there was one month where he got a book called Battle for Iwo Jima by Derek Wright. James hopped up on his lap actually just to watch cartoons. He happened to spot one of the pages, pointed at it, and said,
He goes, "Daddy, that's where my airplane was shot down."
And this is when his dad really started to freak out. I mean, this is just getting so bizarre. He found a website called the Natoma Bay Association, and that's where he connected with a man named Leo Pyatt. Leo was actually a radio man on an Avenger fighter plane with the VC-81 squadron. And he didn't tell Leo why he was doing this, why he was asking him questions or wanted to get in contact with him. He asked him if there was any Corsairs on the Natoma, and he said no, actually. He said that there was only Wildcats and Avengers on the boat. Those were the only types that they had on the Natoma. He then wanted to find out about the location to see if his son had any accuracy with that. And he asked him, did you guys have any missions near Iwo Jima? Leo said that he had been part of 36 missions there. And then he decided to ask him if he knew someone named Jack Larson, if anyone named Jack Larson was aboard the Natoma, and he said yes. Leo didn't know what happened to Jack Larson. He said the last time that he saw him, he had just flown off the Natoma and he didn't see him ever again. Now the search was on for Jack Larson. Bruce couldn't find anything on Jack Larson anywhere. He searched the US National Archives and tried to find lists of anyone who had died while being stationed at the Natoma, and Jack Larson was never on any of the lists. He couldn't even find record of it. In September of 2002, Bruce decided to go to a Natoma Bay Association reunion, actually. And while he was there, he actually did figure out that Jack Larson was a real person. And not only that, but he's still alive. Jack Larson was currently living in Springfield, Arkansas. And after they got a hold of him, he explained that they were friends and he'd actually been his wingman that day. He said that he was struck by enemy fire, and when he didn't return, he was declared missing in action. James Houston Jr. He was a fighter pilot in the Pacific during World War II. He was stationed on the USS Natoma Bay. He was shot down at the age of 21 on a special strike mission against the Futami-Ko Harbor at Chichijima, exactly where he pointed it out on a map. That means he was signing James the Third, because he really was the third James. Now his dad is starting to be really confused because there's only so much denying you can do, right? But the one thing that didn't add up was the Corsair. That's what James still insisted he used to fly, a Corsair. And after Bruce did some digging, he found out that the plane that James was in when he died was actually a FM-2 Wildcat fighter plane, and it was not a Corsair. While he was at the reunion, he said no one even mentioned Corsair. And in 2003, they actually made contact with his sister. Her name was Ann Houston Barron. She was living in California, and when they contacted her and told her what was going on, she was pretty surprised, and she wanted to talk to James herself. So they had several phone conversations, and here are a couple things that James knew, and there's no way he could have known these things. James told Ann that they had a sister named Ruth. That was correct. He said that he used to call her Annie, and she confirmed that he was actually the only one who called her Annie. He told her that as children they had matching portraits done by an artist. Those are such specific things from someone he's never met, never talked to, that how on earth would he have known those things? She obviously was really overwhelmed, and she offered to send a package to James with some things in it and photos. So when they got the package, they opened it up, and the first picture they saw was James Houston Jr. standing in front of a Corsair airplane. That was his favorite plane. That's what he learned to fly with. It's what he flew with most. So no wonder James remembered and was so stubborn about the Corsair, even though they were not even part of the Natoma. And after that, Bruce was sold. He said that was the one missing piece he needed. It made complete sense. The whole thing made sense now. After doing some more digging and talking to other veterans from the Natoma, you know those 3 G.I. Joe dolls that he had named like strange names? Those were real people. And their full names were Billy Peeler, Leon Connor, and Walter Devlin. So they were completely real people that served with him. Bruce, after being so involved in this and doing all this heavy research for so long, actually decided to contribute to the memorial for the Natoma Bay. Many Natoma Bay veterans actually came to this memorial event. So James was a little bit older at this point. He actually got to go to the memorial and see all these veterans. And one guy named Bob Greenwald was there. He was actually someone that served with James Houston Jr. Now what's so weird is that James guessed that this guy was Bob before even knowing it was him. He said that he recognized his voice. Chills, sorry, chills. I mean, it's just so crazy. It's so weird. After the ceremony, his parents noticed that he kind of seemed like bummed out or like not in a good mood, and he said that was because They were all old. There's a lot of people out there that think this whole thing was a lie, that James was in on it, but he's 2 years old. Now James is older. He still thinks that he is a reincarnated version of James Houston Jr. And I've said this before, but I love the analogy of like consciousness being like a radio signal. It's always on. Your soul is always on like a signal, but it needs a device to pick it up, if that makes sense. So the body is like a device. I love to hear stories like this. I love reincarnation stories, especially with facts like this, where it's just like, how could you disprove this? But that is it for me today, guys. I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you next time. Bye. He remembered falling through a hole, and then all of a sudden he was with his new family. Cameron claims that he was reincarnated. He was also named Cameron in his past life. He said that he remembered living on an island in Scotland called Barra. And this is actually a real island. It's a very remote island off the west coast of Scotland. He said that he lived in Barra with his mom, his dad, and 3 other siblings. His mom kind of thought he was just imagining things, that he, you know, just was making things up. But she was confused about how he specifically knew the name Barra because none of them had ever been there. Cameron would talk about how his favorite thing to do in Barra was go to the beach with his dog. He also said that his father was named Shane Robertson, and he said that he remembered his father dying in a car accident. He also would talk about his Barra mom and how she had really long hair, and then at one point she cut her hair really short. He just would remember all these little details about his previous family. So whenever his family would ask him, how did you get from there to here? He would say that he remembered falling through a hole, and then all of a sudden he was with his new family. And what's strange about this is there are other cases of children who may have been reincarnating, claiming to have fallen through a hole. So this isn't the first one to report this. Cameron first started talking about his life in Barra when he was around 2, and it went on till he was 5. Norma was starting to get really worried about him, so she decided she was going to talk to a child psychologist named Dr. Karen Majors. And she specialized in the concept of children living imaginary lives. But the thing was, is she said that the way that Cameron described his past life was very different than the way other kids talk about imaginary lives. She said that most kids understand that even though they have an imaginary friend, they still kind of understand that the friend is not real. However, Cameron was 100% certain that this story was real. So Norma felt like she didn't have any good answers still, so she thought the next best thing to do here was to just take him to Barra. Before they left though, another doctor, Dr. Jim Tucker, came to interview Cameron, and he is actually a child psychologist who's done tons of research on kids who claim to remember their past lives. So one thing that Cameron said about his previous life is that they lived kind of near an airport, and he would watch the planes come and land on the beach, that instead of like a landing strip, the planes would just land on the beach. So Jim actually decided to go with Norma and Cameron to Barra and see everything for himself. And when they first came in, they came in for a landing, and they were coming in on the beach, just like Cameron said. And there was no way that he would have known that. And once he landed, he recognized the airport, the area around him, and seemed really happy to be back right away. So they got on the train to go to their hotel, and as they were riding along, he kept pointing out houses along the way that he recognized, and one of them he even said he knew the family that lived in the house. They all went to the Barra Heritage Center to see if they could find out any more information. They found out that there was indeed a family named Robertson that lived on the end of that area of the beach near where the planes are. Apparently this family actually lived on the mainland, and this was just their vacation house that they would go to in the 60s and 70s. So they hopped in the car and went to the house that his previous life family stayed in. So once they got to the house, Cameron's mood actually completely changed. He went from being a really outgoing, happy, upbeat kid. He was just a very, positive kid. He instantly was emotional and somber. The house had gone through some cosmetic changes, but there were still a few things that remained the same, and it made him really, really emotional emotional to see it all again. There was a brick fireplace in the house that had stayed the same. There was a gate that had still stayed the same. Things that he actually remembered. When he was in the house, he was able to point out which rooms he stayed in and which rooms his siblings stayed in. He talked about how he really missed his Bara mom, even though he knew that she wasn't going to be there. And after visiting this house, they flew back home. And after this, you know, they really felt like he had lived this past life, that everything that he was saying was true. So when they got back home, Norma decided to get in contact with a genealogist and hire her to look into the history of the Robertson family. And it was discovered that that family was indeed from Glasgow, and they had owned that house for over 20 years. And she was actually able to trace someone back to the family. Her name was Gillian Robertson, and she was currently living in Scotland. They think that she was one of the siblings that lived in the house at the same time as Cameron, meaning that this would be Cameron's sister. Norma was able to get in touch with her, and they actually went to go visit her. She said that there was a black and white dog that lived at the house as well, but she did say that there wasn't someone named Shane. She thought maybe he was confusing it with their uncle James, who had spiky hair, and she also said that no one in the family had died from a car accident, so this was really weird. And there wasn't a kid named Cameron who had died in the family. So it was very odd. So after Cameron had visited Bara originally, the memory started to fade away, and this always happens in all the reincarnation cases. As the kids age, the further they are from birth, the further their memories seem to be. And there's kind of this sweet spot where you can even remember. So there's obviously not as much proof. There's definitely some really weird things. So there's no way to say for sure that he was reincarnated, but I definitely think there's enough here to just think that this is really weird, that something odd is going on. How did he know about Bara? How did he know about this house and the planes and the dog that was living at the house? I mean, all these different things. It seems like a lot to just have guessed correctly. And why? Is it possible that maybe he got some of the details wrong because he's mixing up multiple past lives? I mean, if reincarnation is real, maybe we all live a bunch of different lives, and maybe he was mixing up details from multiple lives. But this is definitely one of those stories that just makes you really think, is there more to life than we think there is? But that's it for me today, guys. I hope you're having a great day, and I will talk to you next time. Bye. So John Teeter first popped up in the 2000s, in November of 2000. John Teeter said that he came from a military group on a mission to go to 1975. According to him, in 2036, everyone's recovering from a war. Right now, I know so many of you guys are like, come on, Kendall, why do you believe this? But there's like some real science to back this up. Just watch the whole thing. Give this video a chance. That's all I ask. But that was his original mission, was to go back to 1975 because his grandfather, according to him, worked with computers. And basically, after this big war happened, we lost a lot of our communication systems and computers and stuff like that. And we needed this old function on the computer that allowed basically to talk in different languages, different computer languages. Back then, no one knew that it had those things. And he said it was really common for like their military group to send people back in time who had relatives that they needed something from. So they sent him, and he said that something happened in 1975 that people now think he was hinting that something happened that stopped Y2K. And if you're old enough to remember, back in Y2K, when it turned from 1999 to 2000, people were freaking out. They thought everything was gonna go down, the calendars won't be able to work after that, and all this crazy stuff, all the computers will explode, like really bizarre thing. And people that believe in John Teeter think that he changed something in 1975 that stopped Y2K from happening. Because of whatever happened in 1975, he had to make an unplanned stop in 2000. He said that was not part of his mission, but he went there, and it's crazy. He claims that he, this is just so, I feel like insane trying to explain this, you guys. Sometimes I'm like, what is my life? He went to his parents' house. He came around the time he was born, which is 1998. Sounds like he moved in with his family. He was able to convince them, it's me, I'm from the future, and then stay with his parents for that period of time, and also with his child self, his baby self. If it's true That means that we are currently living on a timeline that was altered in 1975 by a time traveler. Before I get into all the things that John predicted, I want to get really deep and get you thinking about time travel. Now, we're going to talk about parallel universes and black holes, and it's going to get complicated. So put your thinking caps on, okay? Thinking caps on right now. John Titor gave such detailed information about time travel. So he said his time machine was about 500 pounds. It could fit in about a suitcase. That's how big it was. And you couldn't pick it up by yourself, so it had to be moved by car. So you would time travel in a car. It's like Back to the Future, the DeLorean. He literally posted diagrams of this, pictures of it. Over the years, no one has been able to find the original source of that picture. And all this stuff is really detailed, and like people who are mathematical geniuses have looked at a lot of this stuff and say his work and his information is so accurate. He basically said that the time machine was 2 mini black holes called microsingularities. He said if you eject electrons onto them and alter their spin, it creates a gravity field that allows you to move back and forth. Now, he said that there was a 1 to 2% difference in the world. Basically what John Titor said is that time travel isn't time travel as we think. We as humans picture our world as this like linear line of time that moves forward. He said, no, that's not how it works at all. So if you have not seen Interstellar, in Interstellar, they're time traveling, and they're time traveling through black holes. And John basically described multiple universes like standing in a fun house, and you have, you look to your right and you see a bunch of versions of yourself because it's reflecting over and over. You look to your left, you see a bunch of versions of yourself, it's reflecting over and over. And those are all different universes. When you time travel, yourself, when you walk forward, your other selves walk forward into another time as well. It's impossible to get back to the original timeline that you were on. So if you time travel, you're always going to end up in one that might be slightly different. Is it possible we're connecting with our other selves that are in parallel universes on just odd things and we don't know why? Is that what deja vu is? So if you time traveled, even though you probably wouldn't make it back to your original timeline that you're traveling from, your original universe, one of the versions of you will, so that you're always there. Really, really hard to understand. But if you have seen Interstellar, it really helps because it really talks about space and time continuum. And what's also really interesting, John Titor really said that UFOs are actually time travelers from future generations. Maybe space is just a giant network of time travel. So there's a company called CERN here in America, and they're not a super popular company because they keep a pretty low profile actually. John said that soon CERN is going to make the first artificial mini black holes, micro black holes, this whole ability to travel through time without getting crushed by gravity. CERN was going to develop that, start developing. And it turns out that is true. Look it up. They are already doing this stuff. Now, whoever this John guy was very smart. He had a total understanding of physics, and he could draw up these things. He was willing to answer any questions, and the whole miniature black hole thing is not the only thing that's weird. He predicted that, he said it exactly, that Stephen Hawking would come forward and admit the biggest mistake of his career was he was completely wrong about how black holes worked. And people are like, yeah, right, he's not gonna say that. He did. He came forward and said, I completely had it wrong about black holes. And what's really interesting is a lot of the things that John is talking about in these forums, now scientists are coming forward and like backing up a lot of what he's saying. Now, it's really weird. The family has a legitimate lawyer. You cannot find any information on them. It's completely hidden for their protection. The mom released kind of this letter explaining that a lot of the posts that were made by different versions of John. They were making these posts on these internet forums for other versions of themselves to see in case they needed the information or were having trouble getting back. In 2001, Art Bell, and he had a show that was kind of on just kind of topics I do, honestly, and they got a fax from John Titor in the past. No one knows it could be a joke, right? The fax said, in my future, there's a tower in New York. Where is it? There's a big skyscraper, where is it? And this was before September 11th happened, that this was read on Art Bell's show. And it turns out, later that year, 9/11 happens and the Twin Towers fall. That is a pretty big coincidence, if I do say so myself. He pretty much said that there were going to be something that he called internet nodes, which is basically wireless internet as we know it today. Because back then you had to be connected to a modem. Back then people thought it was crazy. People that were on this forum, like, they weren't even thinking that at this point. That's how old this is. And then wireless internet came out. Now, I do want to say that a lot of people think that the whole John Titor thing is a hoax. It has been written off so many times because a lot of his predictions weren't true. Now, the biggest thing that John Titor predicted that most people completely discredit him for, he said that there would be a civil war kind of starting around 2005. He said eventually in like around 2010, people would start each other on the streets. Then by 2013, there would be a full-out world war. Keep in mind, he said there's a 1 to 2% difference. On a grand scale of like eternity, a 1 to 2% difference is a huge difference. It's possible he was just really early on these predictions for our current timeline. Maybe it happens in different times in all different timelines, you know? I just want people to open their mind about it. I don't know if this is supposed to be civil war between like the right and the left, between races maybe? Is it civil war between like us, the people, and the government? It kind of sounds like from what he's talking about that that's really what he meant. But he said there's some type of civil war in the United States, and it basically up the rest of the world. That it launches a full World War III, and it's a nuclear war. Now, what I thought was interesting, he said that if we had a nuclear war, it would be with Russia and China. But apparently these nuclear weapons aren't quite as destructive as the current ones that we have. And he said 3 billion people would die from this war, which is just insane. He was living in a time where after the war was over and people are going through a recovery time, and that everything changed, and that on a grand scale of humanity, the nuclear war was the best thing to ever happen to people. John said that by then there's kind of like a militia in the United States where everyone's part of it. It makes me wonder if this is true, are my future kids gonna be like forced to fight in some type of militia? I think it's really interesting that right now, civil war, like it's like one of the most Googled things, and it makes like our current climate, I could see how it could end up in a civil war. But are they true? Because he was really off in the dates. We're here in 2017 and nothing has happened yet. So you have to remember that. And he said that pretty much every nation got involved in this war. He basically was saying that Russia started the World War III by bombing cities in the United States against the government, the US government, and John was on the other side of that. Makes me think the US government and control, you know, maybe people get more and more woke over the years, and government versus the people, and that Russia steps in to help the people. People would ask about global warming, and he would say that the ice caps aren't melting any faster than they're currently melting now. Another thing he talked a lot about was mad cow disease, which never really became like a big issue. But it is really interesting to note there are scientific studies, there are scientists who believe mad cow disease, or basically beef poisoning, could be some of the diseases that we have now that we call other things and we don't know is necessarily mad cow disease, one of them being Alzheimer's. So he said in the future pretty much everything was decentralized. Money, he said there's still money, credit cards, banks, everything, but there's not like a Federal Reserve controlling everything. He said music, people go away from electronic music, because I always thought in the future it'd be more electronic, but he says that it would actually be less and people would be using instruments and using it as more of a community healer. He said in 2036 we would have better health care, that it would be a lot more like the Western countries now. The only thing he said was different is that you would have a lot more house calls and home doctors than we're used to. Another really interesting thing is he said that mass media is going to kind of go down the and I see that happening. I mean, I think more and more people are realizing that mainstream news is barely talking about the fires in California, for instance. There's so much more information in other places and other sources. John basically says in the future we figure out that mass media and everything that we have is like a bunch of BS. Now we really turn to online creators. And remember, this is in 2000 that he was saying this. He was saying that in the future, people will be uploading their own entertainment onto the internet. How back then could you have any idea what a content creator on YouTube would be, or an influencer? I mean, my job did not exist when I was a kid. The world has changed a lot, and it's really, a lot of it's really lining up with what he said. Whoever this John Titor person is had a very woke mind, a very understanding mind. I don't know, it could all be a bunch of BS. In fact, there's a ton of people that think that Larry Haber, that represents John Titor's family, is actually John Titor himself, and he has a brother who is a computer scientist. People think that the two of them like teamed up and did this. There is so much more on John Titor out there, and if you're interested in this topic and you're interested in time travel, look into it, because there are other examples of time travelers. There's so much out there that I didn't even know was there, and I feel like I'm opening a whole new world for myself by looking into all of this. Anyway, that's it for me today, guys. I hope you're having a good one, and I will see you next time. Bye. always important to be cautious when meeting up with people that you meet online, and this story is a perfect example of that. So now let's talk about John Meehan. So John was born on February 3rd, 1958 in California, I think in San Jose. And let me just cut right to it. John was a sketchy. His whole life, he was a savage. At a very young age, John was already jumping in front of moving cars, trying to pull off insurance scams at the direction of his father. He also got into drugs and selling was very young. He got arrested one time. In 1988, he graduated from the University of Arizona with a Bachelor of Arts degree. And then he attended the University of Dayton School of Law. And while he was going to school there, his friends that hung out with him gave him the nickname of Dirty John. And this was apparently because he had an ability to lure any woman he wanted. So after school ended, John actually met this woman named Tanya Sells. And Tanya was actually a practicing nurse anesthesiast. They administered drugs like pain medication to patients who need it around the clock. John and Tanya Sells got married at the St. Joseph Catholic Church in Dayton, Ohio in November of 1990. None of his family attended their wedding, which she thought was extremely weird, but he basically said that his parents were addicts and most of his family members were like lowlifes that he didn't want to come and ruin their wedding. After they got married, they eventually had 2 daughters, and Tanya helped coach John through his school. Now, why would an ex-dealer want to become a CRNA? He graduated from Wright State University and then from Middle Tennessee School of Anesthesia. But after a while, their marriage began to sour. And then after 10 years of marriage, John actually confronted Tanya and said that he wanted a divorce. And she was pretty surprised. And Tanya was starting to get really suspicious of him for a multitude of reasons. The fact that she couldn't get any information about his past or his family. Now at this time, Tanya was already worried that he might be using because his behavior was so wacky. So she decided to go ahead and search their house, and sure enough, it did not take long for Tanya to find John's secret stash of surgical anesthetics that he was hoarding. And right away, she knew that he was probably using these for recreational purposes because his behavior was so bizarre, or selling them to others, which is even worse and very, very illegal. So she went ahead and called the police and informed them that John was stealing these anesthetics from the hospital. So then 2 years later, in January of 2002, an investigator for the Warren County Sheriff's Department in Ohio was investigating John, and he was very concerned about the whole thing because hospital workers who worked with John said that he actually brought a gun into the operating room one time, and another hospital worker actually saw him stealing Dermarol that he was supposed to be giving to a patient and just injecting them with saline instead. Later on in April of that year, police actually searched John's house and found 45 different containers for 6 different medications in total and a loaded gun. So that really confirmed what the other hospital workers had been saying about him. So that June, John actually pled guilty to his charges, but instead of surrendering to the police, he got the out of there. He was quickly caught and arrested again, but this time he was sentenced to 6 years in prison in Michigan for resisting arrest and for his charges. But surprise, surprise, John only spent 17 months in jail before he was released in 2004. So this brings us to where he met Deborah. At this time in his life, John was 55 years old and Deborah was 59. Deborah is a very fancy lady, okay? She's very respected, she's very successful, and she's got a lot of money. She had spent years in the interior design world and was very good at what she did, and eventually she actually created her own interior design firm called Ambrosia. She absolutely loved her job and truly cared about Ambrosia, which she had put 30 years into this business. So work obviously came easy to Deborah, but love, not so much. In her life, she had actually been married and divorced 4 times already. She had 4 kids who she loved very much. So Deborah at this point in her life is single, she's successful, she's looking for a man to share her life with. And Deborah decided to give online dating a try, so she was on an app for like 50 and older dating, and so was John Meehan. It didn't take long for the two of them to find each other on the website, and Deborah actually was very impressed by his profile and thought he seemed safe. In his profile, he claimed that he was a divorced physician who was also a Christian man, just looking for love and someone to share his life with. So the two of them actually had their first date in October of 2014, and he was all about impressing Deborah. First of all, he had all these really interesting stories from his past experience working for Doctors Without Borders in Iraq, which was completely made up. She was also impressed with him because he was a father. He said he had a couple of kids, and he also said he had a couple of houses, which sounds really nice. Even though they had just met, he acted like she was the most amazing woman in the world, like she was a queen, which is, you know, how we all want to be treated by our men. And Deborah was eating this up. By the third date, John was already telling Deborah that he was in love with her. And not only that, he also was saying he wanted to marry her. And she was enjoying it so much that she was kind of dismissing a few other sketchy details about John and just weird things. Like, first of all, the dude was always wearing scrubs. Now, obviously, when someone works at a hospital, like doctors and nurses, they'll wear their scrubs to the grocery store, wherever after work. But it's not common for them to wear them all of the time outside of their job, and John did. Like it was the only thing he owned or something. So Deborah had a few kids from previous marriages, and one of them was named Jacqueline, who was 24 at the time of all of this. Now, Jacqueline is a very outspoken person. Her mom knew this about her, that she was very critical of all the boyfriends that she'd ever brought home. So Jacqueline was living in the penthouse with her mom at this time, and as Deborah started bringing John over more and more, she started to notice some things that she did not like about him. The first thing that she noticed, of course, was how nasty he dressed. She specifically said he looked like a homeless loser, but not only did she not like his physical appearance, she was also just sketched out by the way he was acting. She said that he would come to their penthouse and just look at everything. Now, Deborah also had a safe in her apartment that she treated like a closet for all her designer stuff, like Jeffree Star's vault. In it, she had her Cartier bags, her Chanel, her Birkin. It's a lot of money that she's protecting in this safe. I mean, these bags cost thousands and thousands of dollars each. It's insane. Jacqueline thought this is weird. Like, why is this man interested in your safe or closet, pretty much, full of bags, unless he was interested in them for their value? Eventually, Jacqueline snapped and told her mom that she wanted nothing to do with this guy and to get him out of the penthouse. So John actually convinced Deborah that they needed to live somewhere else. And this is weeks after they started dating, 5 weeks to be exact. They ended up finding a house for $6,500 a month on the boardwalk of Balboa Island in Newport Beach. And Deborah was actually the one paying for it all, and she paid it all in advance. John said he wasn't able to put his name on the lease at this moment because he was dealing with some tax problems. And she did all of this without her family knowing or her kids finding out because she knew they would be pissed. And Deborah thought that maybe he would have better luck with her other daughter named Tara. Tara came up to the house and introduced herself to John, who was bringing things into the house that they were, moving in. And right away, she said she noticed that he was very cold towards her. But she thought, okay, I'll give him a little bit more of a chance, but it didn't take long for Tara to start seeing red flags as well. First of all, John didn't have a car. She thought, what doctor doesn't have a car? And after a little bit of time there, Tara realized that John was spending most of his day at Deborah's house playing video games. She noticed that her mom was buying everything, including the big screen that he was sitting there playing video games on all day when he was supposed to be working. They were there right around Thanksgiving, and the day before their Thanksgiving celebration really hit the fan because Tara started going through John's stuff and she found a nursing certificate with John's name on it. So he wasn't a doctor. But John said, nothing to worry about here. The reason I call myself a doctor is because I have a PhD and advanced training in anesthesiology. They all got in a big fight, and Tara said that she felt like her mom was choosing this guy over her kids. So John and Deborah continued living their dream life on Balboa Island, and John was very playful in their relationship, constantly keeping things fun. But one of the things that was still bothering Deborah was John's trash wardrobe. And according to John, all of his good clothes were stolen in in Iraq. So Deborah decided to take him out for a shopping spree and bought him an entire new wardrobe full of designer clothes, and now she felt comfortable showing him off a bit more and felt like the relationship was perfect at this point. In early December, he joined her on this business trip to Las Vegas. And what do people do in Las Vegas? They get drunk and get married. And that's exactly what happened with John and Deborah. And at this point, they had known each other for less than 2 months. Meanwhile, her other daughter, Jacqueline, is still very concerned about John. And one thing she starts really thinking about is the fact that John always had dirty hands. And when you're a doctor, that's a big no-no. So John and Deborah started going to church together every Sunday. And one of these Sundays, they came back to their house and went in the living room and saw a woman that neither of them recognized, who had wet hair, was acting super, super creepy, and holding a miniature Bible. At first, Deborah was scared, but thought this could have been some homeless woman that just wandered into their house or something like that. But John reacted to this situation immediately. He grabbed the woman, smashed her head into the countertop, and then put her arms behind her back. He then yelled at Deborah to leave the house and go call the police, so she did. The police came and took her away, and Deborah didn't want to press charges. And looking back, this is all really weird. Investigators believe that there's a good chance John may have set this up to scare Deborah, but because this all happened, John then convinces Deborah that they need to amp up the security at their house. He put up a bunch of security cameras that he could control from his phone. So moving forward in time a bit, now if you remember, John said that he worked for Doctors Without Borders in Iraq and that it was a really traumatic experience. And he actually had all these scars on his body, and he had a story for each one of them of how he got it. But he said because of all of this, he had a really bad back, and so he would occasionally take for it. And he also would inject himself with something, and he told Deborah that this was because he had bad kidneys. Okay, so this is kind of confusing, but Deborah had a nephew named Shad. He was really close with Deborah, kind of like a son to her since his mom was gone. And at first he actually liked John. He didn't see much of an issue with him, but it didn't take long for him to also start seeing some red flags. So he brought up the concerns to Deborah's daughters, and that's when he found out that they had already hired a private investigator to start looking into John because they were just as concerned as him. So soon the private investigator they hired brought back some information. They found out that John had filed for bankruptcy, that he had a nursing license only, not a doctor's license. They found out that he had addresses in Arizona, Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, and multiple across California. The other address they found out was linked to him was from the Orange County Jail. Shad even called Deborah and said that he was really worried about her, and he had already lost one mom and he didn't want to lose her too. And that's when he first brought up the idea of him lying to her. He said, "What if I can prove to you that instead of going to Iraq, that he actually has been in jail?" And her response was, "Even if it's true, I wouldn't care because I love him." And then after this phone call, Deborah decided it was a good idea to tell John what Shad was saying. And John, who thought he kind of had a good buddy-buddy relationship with Shad, was so pissed. He declared Shad as an enemy of their relationship, and he actually threatened violence if he continued to meddle in their relationship. So moving forward in time, this is late March-ish, a letter comes to their house and it's addressed to John, but Deborah was the one to get it, so she decided to go ahead and open it. So she started opening the letter and realized that it was from a former inmate. He got super defensive, started screaming at her, asking why she was reading his mail, but something about this just didn't sit right with Deborah, especially because Shad had told her that he had been to jail, and this doesn't make him look any more innocent. So the next day when John ran out to do some errands, Deborah decided to do some more snooping through his stuff. She found out that John was a former nurse anesthesiast who became hooked on painkillers and was arrested. She found court records that stated that John had swindled and seduced and terrorized and stolen from many other women before. Deborah also found out the police investigated him for a really long time, and that when they searched his storage unit, they found a Colt 38 special handgun They also found binoculars, GPS units, ammunition, heavy-duty cable ties, a bunch of syringes, a pocket saw, a bottle of cyanide, and 8 cyanide capsules. So Deborah was very concerned, obviously, because now John isn't just looking like a sketchball who's mooching off her, he is looking like a very dangerous person. She also found out that while he was in jail awaiting trial, that John was offering other inmates $10,000 per month to 2 detectives on his case plus 5 witnesses. So he was totally out of his mind. She realized that he was released from jail on October 8th, and he met Deborah 2 days later. By the time that they were married in 2014, there were 3 women who had standing restraining orders against him. She started to get worried that maybe John would harm her or harm her kids, and she realized everyone in her family was right. And then she calls her lawyer, who advises her to cut John out of her will. That's right, John had already made it into her will. And then a few days later, John admitted himself to the hospital for back issues, which this is how he would get a refill of his medication. And Deborah realized that this was the perfect time for her to get out of that rental house. And while they were moving her out, they ended up finding some more sketchy stuff that belonged to John. First of all, they found some papers that had some scribbled gun names, codes, phone numbers, and even inmate numbers. He also had a stash of bank routing numbers. Very concerning. So she finally ends up deciding it's time to tell John that she is ending the relationship and moving out. But John was pissed, and immediately he starts talking about how he's gonna end up getting half of her wealth. So fast forward a little bit in time to June of 2015. John has done some major damage control and has pretty much won Deborah back. He basically said the reason he hid his past from Deborah is because he knew she would never give a con a chance. Oh, poor little con men. He said that he had pretended to be a doctor to impress her, and then he basically blamed everything on his addiction and took the path of help me get clean, help me fix my life, I need help, I'm a damaged drug addict. And Deborah decided to give him a second chance, and they moved into a new apartment together in Irvine. So fast forward to March of 2016. They have been married for a full year and 3 months at this point. But she was still very uncomfortable about the fact that her whole family hated him, especially Jacqueline. She really hated him. The tension between John and Jacqueline was just getting worse and worse by the day. Eventually it came to the point where John wouldn't even allow Deborah to see her kids. Talk about controlling. So finally in March of 2016, Deborah hit her breaking point and filed to annul the marriage in April. She was really scared at this point for her life and how she was gonna get out of this relationship safely. So after she left, John left as well and ended up moving into one of her other houses that she owned in Nevada. Deborah ended up moving in with Jacqueline at her apartment in the Carlisle Apartments in Irvine. They felt